Am I here?
You are audible, Sizwe.
Mhm.
I believe that we're also audible in the other part of the dock, our chairman, our guest.
Okay.
Right. Okay, I see that we have got quite a number of listeners joining us here. Okay, so we're about to start.
Back on.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here on the uncensored and unfiltered platform, The Insight Factor. My name is Thabo Makwakwa, and I am alongside our resident host, Sizwe Low. You all know Sizwe Low. He usually hosts our platform conversations here on The Insight Factor. Joining us in conversation tonight is the founder and group chairman of Segunjalo Investment. Segunjalo Group, rather, Dr. Iqbal Surve. Now, Dr. Iqbal Surve is, of course, the chairman, the executive chairman of the group. And you would know entities such as IO, Independent Media, and so many others that are under the Segunjalo Group. Now, Dr. Sermon will be unpacking, the infamous story of what some analysts, of course, have recently described as, the mafia banks, specifically targeting certain companies and individuals. One of the victims, of course, being the Gusunjalo group that had some of its accounts closed. And those who are familiar with the story would know that currently, as we speak, there's litigation going on. NetBank had actually given a notice that it was going to terminate its relationship with its client, being Segunjalo Group.
Actually, on the Twitter.
Right. If you can hear me, Chairman Doc, can you just please mute your mic? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Right. So, as I was explaining, Dr. Save will be here tonight to explain everything that is unfolding at the moment. South Africans have been, kept on the loop on what is actually happening in the country with the mafia banks, of course. And this is our hashtag. You can actually communicate with us using that hashtag, mafia banks. The questions and everything will also be, addressed via the hashtags that you guys will be interacting us with through. Now, before we kick in the belly of the elephant, I want to introduce my co-host, Sizwe Low. Sizwe Low is here and he will be guiding us on what aspects of the conversation we're going to touch on. Sizwe, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Makwakwa. Good evening to you and good evening to our guest, Dr. Iqbal Surve, the chairman of Segunjalo AO Group, and which owns independent media and other various newspapers. So as Mr. Makwakwa has said, we are going specifically to have a discussion about the accounts, the issue of the accounts of independent media and other aspects surrounding that. Of course, many of us, or at least some of us, may not really be familiar with Dr. Surve and his companies and such things. So good evening to you, Dr. Surve. Welcome to the space once again. Just to kick off the discussion and give all of us a background of who Dr. Surve is and the history of the organization that you lead at the moment as chairman. Maybe perhaps you could just give us an outline of where you started and who is Dr. Surve for those of us who may not be aware. Over to you, Dr. Surve.
Hi, good evening, Sizwe. Good evening, Thabo. Firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to your program. I'm really honored to be on your program this evening. Just very briefly, I started. Let me say start at the beginning and say I'm a medical doctor. I'm a sports medicine specialist. I was involved in the struggle for liberation and set up many of the detention treatment centers to treat political prisoners and victims of torture. And of course, I was given the name Struggle Doctor during those very dark years. But it was an important period of my life because it shaped very much the way I think. And in particular, having affinity, with the poor in our country and with people that struggle every day. I myself came from a very poor background and educated myself as one of the very few black students at UCT. In a class of about 200, there were only about 15 of us, and with bursaries and having to work and things like that. But at the end of the day, that experience just simply taught me what a lot of ordinary South Africans have to go through, that are in even more difficult circumstances, and the challenges that ordinary people have in dealing, in getting ahead in life. After about practicing for 10 years, as I said, I was called the struggle doctor. I then, with a few other activists, founded the Second Jala Group about 20 odd years ago. The group employs about 8,500 people, has 40,000 dependents, has revenues of about. Sorry, just 1 second. I might have lost you there. Has revenues of about 8.5 billion, and is in across very many industries. What I like about our group is the following: is that it is predominantly a black group at the level, at the top level, all round. It's a non-racial company, of course, but with a clear emphasis on transformation. We are self-funded. We are not indebted to any banks or institutions or things like that. Right now, as we speak, for the last 12 years, a group of our size with about just under 10 billion in revenues, we don't owe any bank 1 cent. So that's quite unusual. And the reason for that is, as we built our group over time, we decided that we would become self-sufficient. We would not be dependent, essentially, on establishment, if you like, white capital. So we compete in industries where big white companies are, and our companies are competing in e-commerce. Most people don't know, but we own Loot, so I hope all of you will support Loot. In the media space, we started Africa's first news syndication service, Anna. We part shareholder of independent media. We own Inside Publishing. We own a whole host of media companies. In ICT, we own about 30 companies in the ICT sector, from network solutions, software companies, development companies, etc., etc., etc. And in the food and fishing industries, we have very, very, very much large investments of a few hundred million in aquaculture. We're in the fishing and food sectors. So it's very diversified. But what's important is that we are not passive investors. As we acquired these companies over the last 2 decades, they were predominantly white, and we transformed them with the appointment of black management across all of them. And so a big part of our group was career advancement, in particular for black people and black women in particular. So that has been our story, and I guess everything changed in 2013 when I dared to acquire a media house. Now, it's important to understand, until 2013, certainly print media in this country was exclusively the domain of white people. All the large media houses were owned by white people. And in particular, there were a few attempts by Cyril Ramaphosa, by Toko Sekwali, 1 or 2 other people to acquire Sunday Times Group, which is then called Times Media Group. But all of that, they did acquire some shares in those companies, but they were not able to have control of those companies. In fact, in the end, they lost the shares in those companies. My dear friend, Tato Motlana, for instance, who was chairman of NAIL, also, was very clear about this. Eric Molobi of Kagiso, but none of them, unfortunately, succeeded. So we were the first group that actually succeeded in buying a large media house in South Africa. And we bought it from the Irish because just before liberation in 94, Anglo-American, who owned independent media, sold it to the Irish so that it would not fall into the hands of black people or the ANC at the time. When we acquired independent media in 2013, there was a ferocious attempt by SANEF in particular and others to stop our acquisition on spurious grounds, basically saying that, it should not go to us because, which was untruthful, of course, is that we were close to the ANC and things like that. But any event, soon after that, the media campaign against myself, against independent media started, and I couldn't believe how the establishment was absolutely against a media house being owned by black people. And of course, when we acquired independent media, we put in place massive transformation in terms of the appointment of editors, in terms of the appointment of management, and we changed the face of the company, the group completely, with 20 titles, 15 online sites, magazines, etc. It was a huge transformation agenda because we firmly believe that it's important for black people to be able to tell their own stories, the stories about South Africa, and to reflect properly the demography of the country. So, of course, a lot of people speak about IO, but that's only a recent investment. That particular company has been in existence for 20 years. It was a number of IT companies that were built up by Sekunjalo, and subsequently it was unbundled out of one of the other companies and listed. Just to correct you, I'm not the chairman of IO. I don't serve on the board of IO. I'm chairman of the Sekunjalo Group. Over and above that, just to conclude, is that we have a huge philanthropic program. So I personally set up Surve Philanthropies and 7 foundations. They're focused on education, so we give a large number of bursaries on music and arts and culture. Also, in the areas of human rights, and in particular against the trafficking of girls and women on the African continent. So, my family and I have, over the last 2 decades, supported anti-trafficking programs that's directed at vulnerable, in particular young women. So we've been involved in all of that. It's been a tough battle, I must tell you, because this establishment has made me their number one target, the number one enemy, because they don't want a black organization to succeed that is independent and does not take instructions from the establishment. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an introduction, Sizwe.
Thank you so much, Dr. Surve. That was very clear and very concise. I have this question quickly. Before you bought independent media and made it part of the Sekunjalo Group, what exactly was the intention behind? Because I'm sure you could have expanded into other sectors. There's many sectors in business. What exactly was the motivation for you to go into this particular media space? And were you expecting the backlash or the kind of backlash that you received after you decided to go on this journey?
The motivation, strange enough, started in my kitchen with a discussion with my daughter and her friends. And they were complaining about the Cape Times at the time, because I live in Cape Town and we read the Cape Times. And they were saying, well, Dad, the Cape Times doesn't reflect, properly our country. It's always about, white people's suburbs, their news, no stories about black people, and Africa and that kind of thing. And she said to me, Dad, why don't you start a online newspaper that time? And I did, in fact, get a couple of consultants in. We looked at establishing something, but in the end, I decided to go to Ireland and meet the Irish who owned independent media, specifically only to buy the Cape Times. It was not with the ambition of buying independent media. And as I went on, I realized that the media in South Africa, reflects black people as as barbarians, as violent, and white people are reflected very differently. Yet, black people are intellectuals, they're professionals, athletes, artists, etc. And so the story and the history and the correct reflection of our society, which is predominantly black, has never ever come to the fore. And that made me more determined to buy the whole of independent media. And so over a period of 2 years, there was a hell of a bidding process. The Irish wanted almost just over 3.5 billion for the group. It was very difficult, but eventually we were successful in being the key bidder for independent media. But I never expected the backlash. I mean, even before I bought independent media, Sanef at that time was led by the Mail and Guardian editor Nick Dawes. And believe it or not, they launched a campaign as Sanef against our acquisition of independent media. And the reason why they launched the campaign, this was crazy. They said that independent media own 20 newspapers and they will only allow it to be sold to Sekunjalo Consortium if we sell some of those newspapers to other people. So they allowed the Irish to own the entire group, but didn't want us. They even threatened to go to the Competitions Commission at the time. Now, that was the first real sort of attempt to stop us. Subsequent to that, there was articles written in the competitors, in the Sunday Times, the Business Day, City Press, News 24, Mail and Guardian. And for the next year, there was a vicious campaign to really belittle independent media. A few sort of months after that, they started a project which was called Project T, and Project T was directed at myself. They spent about 25 to 30 million to discredit myself and independent, so that we would not get any advertising, we would lose readership. And then because I tried to transform independent media, they made it seem like I was anti-white or something. Now, for example, when I came to independent media, I found that there were, in many cases, white people earning 3 or 4 times what black people were earning doing the same job. And I couldn't understand this. So I introduced a system of merit and made sure that everyone earns the same and people are promoted on the basis of merit, etc. And that resulted in a huge amount of transformation initiatives. But at the end of the day, the fight for independent media is a fight for the soul of the country. There are those who want, us to believe that the establishment and white people in particular are all powerful, they know everything, they are very cultured, etc. And black people are not. And unfortunately, apartheid has not gone. Apartheid has simply reinforced itself in different forms today. And so independent media for me was a important vehicle to tell the story. As by the way, we spent about $500 million establishing the African News Agency. So when I bought independent media, I discovered that we were buying news about Africa from the likes of Reuters, Bloomberg, AFP, AP. And I put a team together to develop an IT-rich news agency, African News Agency, which is now in 40 countries on the African continent and reaches about 1.6 billion people, globally. And the idea of that is that Africans must tell their own story, and we must be able to be masters of our own destiny. And as a result of that, ANA was established as Africa's first news syndication service. So again, it's the same theme of us as Africans, as South Africans, as in particular as black South Africans, telling our own stories, because we have good stories, except the problem is our stories are never told because in particular the media is not controlled by us. And there may well be good black journalists and good black editors working in other media houses, and they definitely are. However, the people that pull the the strings are still those with the purse, and those are predominantly. I mean, look at Naspers. Naspers, the name is Nationale Pers. It was the media arm of the National Party. Times Media, I mean, it's the head of the Sunday Times, for example, was a former security police officer. And I can go on and on to explain. Caxton came out of the National Party as well. I can explain how the media, ENCA is owned by Johan Rupert and Johnny Copeland and, HCI, etc. So the media is one of the most contested terrains in this country. And, it's okay if you're at the periphery. It's okay if you're in politics as a politician or the ANC or if you the EFF or whatever, but you cannot, there's an unwritten rule. You must not get into the media space. And I guess if you like, my decision to go into media was met with a ferocious resistance by the establishment. And even today, it's a 9-year war now against my company. From 2013 to today, it's, just because we bought independent media.
Right. Thank you so much for that, Doc. I'm really seduced to just, ask about why exactly the fight to have, independent media perishing, not only independent media, but some of the other entities under the group. Why the interest on that? Why is it that the independent media specifically should be out? Because, whoever speaks about the chairman of the Segunjalo group, they always try to, bring it down to independent media because that is the platform that is accessible to so many people in the country. But before we go into that, I am interested in knowing how exactly did you acquire independent media and the other entities under the Segunjalo group?
Well, when we started, which is, I say about 1998, we started the group, and I left medicine, and we started the group with 250,000 Rand. And we were able to build it up to about 500 million by 1999. So in May 1999, I listed what was then called Segunjalo Investment, which is today called AEI, on the JSE, and I was the youngest chief executive of an investment holding company on the JSE ever. And from that point onwards, we made a number of acquisitions. We made some very smart acquisitions in the ICT sector, and we were very successful building up the group into quite a large grouping over time. But what I appreciate the most is not so much the fact that the group, in size was many, many billions, but the fact that we could employ so many people, the fact that the majority of the people were black, and the fact that many young people emerged through the ranks to take up senior positions and directorships in our group. So over time, we had one ethos that we will acquire companies, but we will control them. We'll not be passive shareholders of companies. In some cases we are, but in the very minority. In most cases we have control of companies, ownership control, management control, so we can control the capital flows, we can control the direction. The other thing is, unlike a lot of other, when we listed the group in 99, part of the group, today Segunjalo is a private company, and it's got 3 public listed companies on the stock market. But when we listed the one company in 99, there were 40 companies listed on the JSE. There were about 200 other black companies that were not listed that were large. And many large companies have disappeared today, like the likes of New Africa Investments, Batata Motlana, Don Nubes, Rail Africa, Turkish Aqualis for the Panda. Very few have survived until today. And if you look at the JSE, for example, the JSE, the 12 trillion Rand JSE, less than 3%, and in fact, if you take the debt into account, it's only 1.5% of the JSE is owned and controlled by black people. Now, that's ridiculous. Almost 30 years later, in our democracy, we can't have that situation. So we were very deliberate. We never extended ourselves as a company. We made sure that if we couldn't afford something, we didn't buy it. And what was unique to us, in the first decade, we had minimal bank loans. In the second decade, we had no bank loans. So the reason for that is that we felt that if we were indebted to banks and financial institutions, they would dictate, like they've done to many other black companies, what they must do, how they must operate. And we decided, we'll build up our own capital base over time. And it was through that process that we were able to be, successful and build up the group over time.
Thank you, Dr. Surve. I believe that is very enlightening, because for most of us, we don't have much of an idea where you have been and how you started and who exactly you are. So I believe that kind of background is very illuminating. What I would like to get into now, because we have a lot to go through, what I would like to go into is how most of us got to know you, or got to hear about you personally as a person, as Dr. Surve. That was for myself and many others, I believe, was in 2019 at the PIC inquiry. Now, could you give us a brief background how you found yourself appearing behind, in front of the PIC inquiry, and what was that about? And before we even go into the outcomes of that, what happened that led to you and your company and your group being summoned, as it were, to appear before the PIC inquiry?
Well, let us start off at the very beginning and say that in our 20-odd years of existence and our investment in more than 200 companies, the PIC has only invested in 3 of our investments with us. It's very important to understand the PIC has never loaned any part in Second or anyone in Second any money. It has been a co-investor with us in transactions. For example, if you take independent media, at the time when we negotiated the transaction at a value of about 2.4 billion, which was down from the original 3.2 billion, there's a myth that the PIC gave Second the money. That's absolutely untrue. The PIC invested 850 million, of which 650 million was for its own account. The Second consortium invested the other 1.2 billion, which included the Chinese in Telecom and included Saktu. The PIC had invested for its own account. It's very important to understand. So the notion that somehow or another the PIC had invested, that was a myth that was repeated by, in particular, our media detractors. The second point to make is that the media, so there is no doubt in my mind that the Empathy Commission, the PIC Commission, was set up to target our group. Why was that? Because when Ramaphosa became president ANC president in 2017 and country president in 2018, there was a determined effort by people like the Pravin Gordons of the world and others to undermine us as Second because we were seen to be one of the few black businesses and organizations that were truly independent. For example, we were the only media house as independent media which was not controlled by anybody. We were objective, and they realized that in itself, posed a grave danger. So, for example, independent media was the one that published the statements of Ramaphosa, the CR17 bank statements, because we believed it was in public interest. And was it not for us, the country would not have known about it. It was our brave journalists and editors that published that. Secondly, independent media was the entity that disclosed the corruption under PPE. When many people, during COVID, many people in government, right up to the president's office, stole, as we now know, more than 32 billion in PPE funds, which were for public hospitals and for the poor. Now, because we have consistently published these stories, which the current administration doesn't like, and we are not afraid, and it's not me who publishes it is our journalists and our editors who publish it. But, of course, as the owner, I give them the freedom to be able to help our country and to help the poor, because ultimately when people steal like this, they're stealing from the poor, right? So we are not the favorites of the current government, firstly because many of the current leadership in government are proxies for white capital. And how do we know that? We say that precisely because the bank statements of President Ramaphosa show that his biggest funders were white capital. And even today, I mean, the other day I saw that the ANC was funded by Naspers, that the Oppenheimers are funding the DA and all sorts of people, etc. So, you know, the reason why I'm making this particular point, there was a concerted effort by the media to make a lot of noise about us. The president then appoints them party commission to target. Now, this is the crazy thing, right? The party commission targeted only black companies. Only black companies. Can you believe that? So there were about 12 black companies targeted by the party commission because the president gave the evidence leader Libber, Afrikaner fellow, advocate, the right to choose which companies should be targeted. So they targeted the unlisted portfolio, which was about 70 billion in total. In other words, that was the portfolio which the PIC mainly invested with black companies. In that portfolio was, of course, independent media, which was part of the PIC investment. But the real portfolio of 1.6 trillion of the PIC investment on the stock market and with white companies was not touched. Now, let me give you an example of this. The PIC, after 2017, lost about 230 billion, okay, as a result of their investment in white companies. In particular, they lost 32 billion with Steinhoff. They lost money with EOH, which is as corrupt to the core by their own admission, with Tongaat Julep, corrupt to the core by their own admission, and numerous other companies. Yet, the party commission did not even bring a single senior executive of those companies to come and testify. When this was established by the president, I realized immediately this was an attempt to target Sekunjalo, to target independent media, and to target our group and its independence. I then contacted the commission myself, and I said, look, I want to come and volunteer to come to this commission because I want to make the point that the PIC cannot just invest 70 billion in black companies and 1.6 trillion in white companies. And I went to the PIC commission and I had a huge altercation with Jill Marcus, who was the one person who allowed Steinhoff to go overseas when she was governor of the Reserve Bank. She was the one person that allowed almost a trillion rand worth of investments out of our country that belongs to our country. And I said to Ms. Marcus at the PIC Commission, it is not acceptable that this country today, the JSE, the 12 trillion JSE, that only 3%, if that, of the JSE is in black hands, and that 97% of the JSE is in black hands. And what happened next, of course, was that Ms. Marcus said, well, stop referring to black and white. And I said, I'm not going to stop because these are the facts that the PIC needs to invest further in black companies to transform the economy of this country. Why should I apologize for saying that? I was there for 2 days, and there was no issue at all, and it was, and I presented voluntarily. When the report of the Party Commission came out, the report made no adverse findings on us, but made inferences. And when we wanted to tackle that, they said, well, the PIC would investigate it further. Well, 2 years later, the PIC never investigated it. I then asked a retired judge, a former judge, Willem Heath, who was the head of the SIU under President Mandela, to independently investigate these inferences or allegations. They're not findings, by the way. And Judge Heath's report came out, and I wish all of your listeners would read the report of Judge Heath, where he unequivocally says that there was no basis for any adverse finding whatsoever against Sekunjalo or any of its entities. But more importantly, Judge Heath says this has been a great injustice to Sekunjalo. Now, you see, commissions are used not just in South Africa, but even in countries like the US. You had McCarthyism. Commissions are used to target people. It's a way of getting rid of people. And the idea is ultimately, the first step in all of this is they use the media to blacken your name, to tarnish your reputation. The second thing is they establish a commission that kind of gives validity to these things. The third thing is they then go and use regulatory bodies, like in our case, they use the JSC, they use the FSCA, they use all these institutions against myself and against our group. And finally, of course, if they are able to, they'll try and use law enforcement agencies. And this is the plan. It's a 4-step plan, which they do. And it's the playbook implemented by the Americans. There's nothing new about it. And so this plan of establishing commissions, using the media, the hostile, the media that's friendly to these people. So this is what we've experienced today. So the Mpati Commission was nothing but a witch hunt. And of course, they found nothing. I mean, if you read the Mpati Commission, what's quite laughable is that the Commission says, in no uncertain terms, it says in so many words, by the way, that no person from the PIC, manager, director, whatever, benefited in any way from the Sekunjalo group, which is a strong statement of the fact that we had no corrupt relationship with the PIC. Now, in my 20-odd years, I've operated with integrity when I was a doctor. I operate integrity today as a businessman. And so I find it just abhorrent that these people would even suggest such a thing. Look, at the end of the day, this is a fight for the soul of the country. The current leadership in government is a proxy for white monopoly capital or for the establishment capital. They are there to carry out the aims and objectives of that capital. We stand in the way of that. We stand in the way in 2 ways. Firstly, we stand in the way because we're a black independent group with our own capital base. We can invest in the future of our country and we can influence that future positively for the benefit of all our people. Secondly, we own a media house, and that media house, is very objective, is able to give the stories that are not told in other media houses. And I think thirdly and importantly, we are an example of a successful black enterprise employing almost 10,000 people with 40,000 dependents, almost 10 billion of revenues, and we have done so as a majority black owned, controlled, managed organization. Now, the establishment doesn't want such successes to be seen. They would like, and the proxies would like, to pretend that black people cannot be successful. Black people, if they're successful, they must be corrupt. If they're successful, they've done something wrong. Well, I can tell you that's not the case. I can tell you, in my case, certainly, I have acted always with integrity. The people with me have always acted with integrity and will continue to do so. This is a fight for the soul of our country.
Now, for those who have just joined us, this is the Inside Factor Trader Spaces. We are in conversation with the chairman of the Sekunjalo Group, Dr. Iqbal Surve. My co-host is Sizwe Low. Doc, you have mentioned that, unlike Steinhoff, Deloitte, and others, where there's actual evidence of irregularities, actual evidence of corruption, Sekunjalo Group is being targeted. And we see, of course, in media reports and elsewhere that the banks have actually moved into closing some of these accounts. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, in our 20-odd years of existence, we have never, ever had any incident of corruption ever. We have had never any law enforcement agency, any institution ever. And the reason is we have a very clear anti-corruption policy in our group. And I personally will take you to the police station and charge you myself if you even get involved in any amount of corruption. Let me give you one clear example of that, right? A very, very clear example was in the fishing industry. When all the other big white fishing companies were overfishing and making literally hundreds of millions in revenue, when we acquired Premier Fishing and we saw that, I took a stance to say, we will not overfish. And we were punished by the industry. And I took the view that the fish belongs to all our people. And the quotas are there in order to have sustainability for the future generations. We came under enormous attack by the white establishment, yet we stood our ground. Because of us, government was able to intervene, and they were able to then, the Scorpions at the time were able to arrest those large white companies that were involved in overfishing. Now, if we in any way were inclined towards corruption, we could have overfished and made lots and lots of money. And that has been the hallmark of our group. We rather build slowly, build carefully, but build a genuine legacy of an empowerment grouping. And that's why they want to destroy us, because we are an example of a successful, integrity-driven, value-driven organization. Now, if you take the likes of EOH and Steinhoff, these people have. Steinhoff lost South Africa 250 billion. These people were corrupt to the core. EOH was corrupt to the core. They admit to it. They bribed people like Zizi Kodwa and others. Tonga Hewlett was corrupt to the core. Mackenzie, Bain. I can go on. ABB. All these people are corrupt to the core. Yet, nothing's been done about them. Now, after the party commission didn't work, the propaganda machine didn't work, these guys realized the only way they can stop the second Jala group is to terminate our bank accounts. And so, who owns the banks? Let's first start there. The banks are owned by the Ruperts and other ABSA. The big shareholder is Vanguard, which is a group close to the Ruperts, Rupert himself, FNB, the same thing, etc. Nedbank used to be called Nederlandsche. All these banks have their roots during apartheid. All of them, by the way. So what happened is that they then said, okay, we can't bring Second Jala down. We can't bring Dr. Surve down because he's not corrupt, because that's now what the party said. So you know what we'll do? We've got enough media noise about him. Let's shut these accounts, okay? Let's just do that. Let's create the impression that he's done something wrong. So these banks came up in sequence, and they started shutting our group's accounts. First ABSA, then Investec, then FNB, then Nedbank, and that's the sequence that they have. And that's the only way. So if they cut you out of the financial system, they don't care about 8,500 employees. They don't care about the legacy. They don't care about the contribution to our country and the economy. The president goes to an investment conference and he talks about inviting investors to come from overseas. We have invested a second Jala alone, 5 billion in the last decade in our own economy to create jobs. Yet the president and his people allow the establishment banks to do this to us. For what reason? And what are the reasons of the banks? Let's go into that. So what do the banks actually say? They say in letters to us in so many words, Dr. Surve, we don't accuse you of second Jala, of being corrupt, of money laundering, or of illicit this. We know you're not. But you know what? Because of all the negative media, we're going to shut your accounts. And you know why we can shut your account? Because there's one judgment in the SCA, the Supreme Court of Appeal in 2010, which was a judgment called the Bredenkamp judgment, which gave the banks the right to shut anybody's account at any time in this country. So, this is the absurd situation we face today. That if a bank manager, a bank individual doesn't like you because of your color of your skin, because where you stay, how you smell, what you eat, where you come from, what class, they can simply shut the account because The Supreme Court of Appeal has said so. They don't even have to provide you with a reason. So they've used that legal case against us. Not that we've done anything wrong. So this is what we're up against. Now, when you say to them, guys, how can you shut our accounts? EOH is corrupt by their own admission. They stole 1.1 billion from the state. Steinhoff is corrupt by their own admission. Tom God is corrupt by their own admission. Bain and McKenzie are corrupt by their own admission. Yet these guys have all bank accounts. And you know what they say to us? They say to us because those companies have reformed. So we say to them, but what must we reform for? We've done nothing wrong. And then they say, well, it doesn't matter. We still shut your accounts because the law gives us the right to shut your account. But that is what happened under apartheid. Under apartheid, they said the law gives us a right to force you to have a dom pass. The law gives us a right to force you to stay in a certain area. The law gives us the right to do what we want to do to you. So how different is this today from apartheid? These banks were formed during apartheid. Absa Bank, used to be, in the olden days, the Volkskas Bank, was the bank started by the Broederbond. It was started by the National Party and the Broederbond. Nedbank is the Nederlandse Bank, FNB, RMB, those guys, it was a bank started by these guys. Investec was started by White Capital. And then you have a situation where 6 banks control 92% of the banking system in the country and 100% of the payment system called Bank Surve. Now, this is absurd. We can't be 30 years in, and nobody has challenged the banks. The only group that has got the courage to challenge the banks is Sekunjalo, because the banks are very, very powerful. I must tell you that. But South Africans must rise up, because at the end of the day, if we don't rise up to neo-apartheid, economic apartheid, and the power of these banks, our lives are forever going to be controlled. If you look at COVID, for example, the government said they are providing 200 billion of guarantees for businesses during COVID. So what happens next? The very banks that are provided with these guarantees only spend about 40 billion of that, and they spend 80% of the 40 billion on white companies. Now that is absurd. By any means, that is absolutely absurd. It means 32 billion. They could have spent 200 billion, but they didn't. 32 billion they spent on white companies that are less than 8% of this country, and 8 billion on black companies, individuals and professionals that make up 92% of this country. Now, that is unacceptable. So, Sekunjalo is targeted because I'm outspoken, because I stand for transformation, because I believe we as black people must determine our own destiny. We did not fight for freedom, fight against apartheid, so that we can now be controlled in a post-apartheid era by proxies of white capital. No, we have to stand up against that.
Right. Thank you so much for these insightful remarks. I understand that there's quite a lot of people, of course, who have joined us here on our Twitter Spaces to listen to you, that we're not aware of some of the issues that have confronted the independent media, Sekunjalo Group and many other entities under the group. We understand, and of course, we have learned through reports that there had been raids conducted in some of these offices where, of course, you are the chairman of the group. There are entities that were targeted, be it the state security, but one notable one is the FSCA, which is the Financial Service Conduct Authority. We understand that they raided some of your offices at the Sekunjalo Group, and, can you just give us, because there's financial services commission authority that should be perhaps dealing with more serious important issues. There's corporate crimes in the country. The people are complaining by the fact that it appears that the judicial services, the judiciary as a whole, is not really being hard as it should on certain companies. You have mentioned your Steinhoff, you've mentioned Deloitte and many others. Why is it that the FSCA raided your offices? Can you just take us through that? And of course, I would like for us to go straight into the issues of the Equality Court, because I understand that there is also a case right there, specifically with the Net Bank and many others, that have, made it very clear that they want to terminate a relationship with the Segunjalo Group.
Thank you for asking about the FSCA. Now, for those who don't know it, the FSCA is the Financial Service Conduct Authority in South Africa. It used to be called the FSB. And the FSCA is meant, first of all, to regulate the financial service sector. It's meant to regulate banks, meant to regulate institutions like the JSE and others. Now, I went public at the time of the raid, and I accused Pravin Gordhan and Ismail Mamayat and President Ramaphosa himself for having been responsible for the raid, because we had information that they were. And of course, they've never come out publicly to deny it. So I did that on the basis, and I'll tell you what happened. I've explained to you earlier that how the system works is, first they use the media to trash you. Okay, that's the first part of this sort of playbook. The second thing is they appoint a commission to trash you. The third thing is that they use regulatory bodies to trash you, such as the FSCA, the JSE. And the last thing is they use the banks to shut your bank accounts. And then finally, law enforcement authorities. This is the playbook that they're using currently. In our case, I can tell you that we have 3 companies on the JSE that we have invested in. These are AEI, Premier Fishing Brands, and IO. IO was a new listing in 2017, December 2017. It got unbundled out of our group, and we remained an investor in it, along with the PIC and other investors. When IO listed around about the beginning of, end of 2017, beginning 2018, there were journalists that started writing negative articles, and hedge funds and asset managers started what is called bringing down the share price deliberately. And they did this to all of our companies to try and destroy the value of these companies. We knew who they were, so I wrote a letter in February of 2019 to the FSCA. Now, this is how absurd the situation is, by the way. I wrote a letter myself, and I wrote to them and I said, listen, you need to investigate these companies and these share trades that are being done by asset managers. I gave them the names that are bringing down the share prices deliberately. There are many community shares. For instance, IO has been in existence for 20 years. It's a highly successful company. But there were community shareholders that were part of that from the very beginning that bought their shares, at 50 cents. And they could now exit their shares at 43 Rand. And here was a situation where these hedge funds and asset managers were bringing down the share price deliberately. So I asked the FSCA to investigate. About a month later, I had 2 chaps from the FSCA coming to my offices, and they were very casual about it and said, look, we're here, we've got your letter, etc. We'd like to hear from you about which entities, and I gave them the information, and I was with a colleague of mine. We had nothing more from the FSCA, believe it or not, until October that year, at the height of the PIC shenanigans and party commission. About 20 people come to various offices of ours, intimidate my employees, were very aggressive, take all documents, computers, hard drives, mobile phones, and we say to them, on what basis are you coming here? And they say, well, we have a warrant. We said, a warrant to do what? And they say, well, here's a warrant from a judge. We said, on what basis? Any case, we look at this warrant, it's asking for 7 things. We said, but why don't you just email us? But this is crazy. We complained and you're raiding us. In any case, we took that matter to the Constitutional, to the High Court in Cape Town, where we set out exactly how this is a political thing. This has got nothing to do with, because if they wanted this information, They could have simply asked us. But in any case, we were the ones that actually complained. So here you have a very clear example. And we even said that recently we had a whistleblower from Treasury that told us that this raid was coordinated by Ismail Mamayat, who was the Deputy DG of Treasury, and it was done in order to embarrass us, to tarnish our reputation, and to bring Second Jalo down. And we, of course, know Mamayat is a proxy for Pravin Gordhan, and it's always been so. And we know that Pravin Gordhan doesn't like us, and I'll tell you why Pravin Gordhan doesn't like us. It's very important. Because one evening, there was a young reporter in our group, who's today an editor. His name is Ayanda Mdluli. And that evening, it was about 10 o'clock, I got a phone call from Pravin Gordhan. And I don't normally get phone calls from ministers, but I got this call. And he said to me in no uncertain terms, he said, look, I don't normally fight with media owners, but I'm calling you because you have a reporter that's called me and asked me about monies in an account overseas in Canada that is in my name and in the name of my daughter. And I said to him, look, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't interfere with my reporters or editors, but if this is not true, why don't you simply contact the reporter and tell them this is not true? And I'm sure they will publish your side of the story as well. Subsequently, after that, I made a terrible mistake according to Pravin Gordhan. I hired Piet Rampidi and Mzili Kazi of Africa to join the Sunday Independent. Well, actually, I didn't hire them. They were hired by our editor-in-chief at the time. Nonetheless, Pravin Gordhan went and said that was a declaration of war by hiring those two people because he had a battle with them with regard to the road unit. So he then launched a massive campaign against myself and Second Jalo Independent Media. So Mamayat is really a proxy for Pravin Gordhan, and what they've done at the FSCA is simply carry out this political campaign against myself. They try and hide it behind share trades, behind this. And of course, there is a predetermined outcome by these people because at the end of the day, this is part of a playbook to crush the Second Jalo group, to crush myself, and to crush independent media. And there's a determination, there's a frenzy of activity by them. You know why? Because the ANC itself enters probably its most important conference at the end of this year. And they cannot allow independent media or Second Jalo to be there in December. So their plan is with the bank accounts to shut down independent media very quickly. In fact, the plan was to shut it down by July this year and then to shut down Second Jalo. So in no way can independent media point out, what is happening in this government with certain people out there. And this is this is unfortunately, so the FSCA is simply part of the political battle against. They will of course say they're not, they'll claim they're not, but we have, as I said to you, a whistleblower from within Treasury has come to us. And I can even go further. Look, we have made it very clear we will not take this lying down. Theirs is intimidation. So many people have approached me in the last while and said, look, why don't you just give up independent media? Just give it to Cyril. Give it to his people. If you do that, they'll leave you alone. Your business can continue. And of course, I cannot do that because we have fought for our freedom in this country. And we've fought for media freedom. We fought for the right to have all voices heard. If independent media is not there tomorrow, of course, platforms like Inside Factor play a valuable role. But independent media is critical because it's got large-scale presence in the country, reaching 10 million people a day. It's got international presence. And it's very important to understand that no matter how much they try and trash independent media, for instance, we have the largest Zulu-speaking newspaper, Isolezwe, which reaches 1 million people every day. We have Xhosa newspapers. We have English newspapers. So at the end, we have online sites. So the powers that be, government, for instance, hardly advertises with us today because they're trying to teach us a lesson. They advertise in our competitors. The private sector practically boycotts us today, except in a few instances. And this is driven by our media detractors like Anton Harber and others. We actively go out there telling them not to advertise with us. All of this is an attempt to undermine independent media. Now, they can't go out there and just simply shut down independent media, because that's an issue of media freedom. So what they do indirectly, they target me personally, they target Sekunjalo, that supports independent media with its 1,600 employees, and in that way, indirectly, they hope to shut down independent media. So the FSCA is simply but a proxy. It is a tool in the battle, and I've said so publicly, by the way. And this is all part of intimidating me, and it's part of rolling back the freedoms that we've won. Look, we are the I think one of the few large independent black organizations in this country today, and they need to teach us a lesson. And the reason for that is, if they can bring down Sekunjalo, if they can bring down independent media, if they can bring down Dr. Surve, that will be a lesson to every single black person in this country. Don't you ever stand up against the establishment and white capital or their proxies. If you dare stand up, you see, we could bring down Sekunjalo, we could bring down independent media. We will bring you down. We have the power to do so. But you know, I draw my inspiration, Surve, from you and all the listeners on this platform, because I know together we'll triumph against these very evil people that try and do what they try and do to our country and its people.
Thank you so much, Dr. Surve. I think outside of everything that you've said tonight, I think I need to mention that you are an inspiration to a lot of us. It takes guts for someone to just go through all of this and be determined to go through with it, considering what's at stake. You know, this is your livelihood, this is your reputation, and this is your life. You know, you have a family and you have people to look after, and for you to have to go through these things on principle, because this is not, it's certainly not just about money. It doesn't seem to be that sort of thing for you and your colleagues and such. So I think you are an inspiration for a lot of us who may be thinking about, you know, doing things in a way that the establishment might not be happy about. I would like to go into this quickly, Dr. Surve. The state capture inquiry. I'm talking about this because we've been hearing from the media, where we've been seeing what they're saying about the Sekunjalo Group, independent media particularly, that they've issues with, they call it reputational damage, they've issues with morals, you know, they feel that, you know, the independent media group has a bad reputation, as they say. Is this really the truth? Because when you look at what transpired at the State Capture Commission, there were a lot of entities, a lot of companies, white-owned companies that were implicated and were found to have done certain things that are primarily unacceptable, immoral things, you know, things that should, in a fair and a just world, should be damaging a company's reputation. So is it true that these banks, because some of them were banks, by the way, some of these white-owned companies that were implicated at the State Capture Commission and found, at least we saw the evidence that was presented, were up to no good. So is it true what they say when they say, are they being honest when they say to us the issue? By they, I mean the banks. When they say the issue is that there's been a lot of course, it's manufactured reputational damage. But even if they're relying on that, are they being honest to the public when they say they're trying to step away from you because of that?
Well, let's look at the issue of reputation, first of all. The banks have no right to do this. In terms of FICA, the reputation risk that the banks talk about, in terms of the FICA regulation, it is a reputation risk of the banks itself if they don't implement FICA. These banks have used the issue of reputation risk simply as an excuse because they have they've investigated tens of thousands of our transactions. They couldn't find one simple illegal transaction, not one, by the way. So now they go and talk about reputation risk. And what do they mean by that? They say, well, in fact, they attach it to their court papers. They attach all the articles by News 24, Daily Maverick, Business Day, all our competitors. And they now say, look, Dr. Surve, all these people write about you. Now, I don't choose who writes about me. I've just explained to you. They write about me precisely because they are detractors of independent media. That's what is happening right now. So when they write about you, but then I say to the banks, but hold on. You are saying, to who are we a reputational risk? Even if they write about me. They write about me, but Nedbank, you have been found by the State Capital Commission to be corrupt. They've instructed the Asset Forfeiture Unit to take back 750 million from you, Nedbank. So how can you say we are reputational risk? Secondly, Investec Bank, you've been involved in global tax fraud, global, not South African tax fraud, of tens of billions. How can you come back to us? All of you banks, you have been involved by implicated and found guilty by the Competitions Commission in rigging the rand. Now, if you rig the exchange rate, that is treason to a country. In other countries, you'd go to jail for that. These banks, it is their reputations which they have, negative reputations which they have caused on themselves. It's got nothing to do with us. But then again, they bank Steinhoff. How did Steinhoff manage to lose 250 billion of South Africans' money? Was the money in cryptocurrencies or was it in gold? No, it was in these very banks. How did Bain and McKenzie bribe the people at Eskom and Transnet? How did EOH bribe the people in all the state institutions? How did Tonga Juliet get away with what they did? They used these very banks. So these very banks that are talking about reputational risk are the ones that facilitated and enabled state capture in this country. All the politicians that were paid, some of them still have bank accounts today with these banks. The president laundered 1 billion through these bank accounts. There's the evidence of that in CR17. PPEs, 32 billion. How did they launder this? It was done through these banks. Yet they come to us, a company of integrity, that they couldn't prove one single transaction, not 1 cent wrong. In fact, it's laughable. They said, but Dr. Surve, you transfer from one account of your company to another account. Now, how in the world can you deny us the right to transfer? We don't borrow money from the banks. We have our own central treasury. We fund our own businesses. So if I want to fund one part of let's say I want to support independent media, and I want to transfer 30 million from my one company to independent media, why can't I do that? It's our money. It's our group's money. But these guys, they're crazy, man. There's no, anywhere else in the world, the banks would have been slapped by a competitions commission with massive fines. In fact, the bank executives should be going to jail today for what they're doing. Yet, they're targeting us because you know why? They're an oligopoly. They are powerful. They are individuals that believe they are untouchable. They have 7 trillion in assets, which is more than the GDP of our country. And because of that, and because they are also shareholders in the South African Reserve Bank. And what most of your listeners must know is the South African Reserve Bank is one of only 8 reserve banks in the world, by the way, which is not controlled by the government. One of only 8. And what's even worse, they are supposed to supervise the banks because this should never happen either to myself or anyone else in this country or to our group. But they are shareholders in the South African Reserve Bank. So you have a crazy situation where the South African Reserve Bank, which is supposedly owned by our government, is owned by the Ruperts, is owned by Absa, is owned by Investec, is owned by FNB. Now, what's going on over here? How can you be a player and referee at the same time? We are doomed as South Africans if we allow the situation to continue. If we don't call for the Reserve Bank to have greater accountability to our country and its democracy and its people, it is our people that elect our parliament. It is our people that must control such institutions. It is our people that must print money so we can reduce the massive unemployment in this country. It is unbelievable that the rich have become richer in South Africa, that we have the worst inequality in the world today. Let me tell you an interesting fact. Our country has the worst inequality in the world. But not only do we have the worst inequality of all countries in the world, if you take our country against all the countries in the world combined, we have still got the worst inequality. Do you know why? Because our banks are not prepared to support black people and the poor and black professionals, black entrepreneurs. They charge them higher interest rates. They don't give them money. And that's why I have staked everything that I have to challenge the banks in the courts. And that's why there's a class action by Godric Gadi attorneys with 6,000 people to date. And all of you, if you've been discriminated by these banks, if they've charged you too much interest like they do to all black people, if they've taken your homes and your cars from you, if they've not treated you fairly, then join the class action suite. The only way we're going to change this country is to challenge these oligopolies. We did that during apartheid. Against tremendous odds, I and others fought these people that are evil, right? Because apartheid was evil. So, can I tell you what is the analogy of this reputation issue? It's like the slave traders. When the slave traders came to our mother continent of Africa, and they took our people as slaves, what did they say? Those slaves were bad, they were terrible, they had diseases, they had this, and we're going to take them across continents, across the waters to other countries and continents, and they became slaves. They dehumanized our people in order to make them slaves. It was the colonizers that came from Europe that did that to our African people. It's no different today. They are simply trying to use this thing about reputation in order to have power, in order to enslave us again. And second, Joel, and because I'm very clearly outspoken, as you and your listeners can hear, now I'm not afraid, because you know what? I was never afraid during apartheid to fight the system, to fight inequality, to fight evil. I'm not going to be afraid today. It has been at great cost to myself, my family, my friends. In fact, most friends have deserted me because I've decided to take the stance of fighting the system. But I will continue to do so until there's the very last breath in me, because we cannot allow, for the sake of our country, its people, its children, and its future, we cannot allow ourselves to be enslaved by these oligopolies. We need our real freedom, and for black people to emerge to be masters of their own destiny going forward. It is quite late, and I have to also break my fast, so excuse me.
All right. A very touchy conversation here on the Insight Factor tonight. Now, Doc, you have, repeatedly reiterated that there is, this propaganda-driven machinery out there that is out vying for your fall. Could you just please, for a layman out there who does not really understand what is necessarily happening out there, could you just take us through that? I mean, there is a 2021 report exposing a network of Twitter accounts titled Bell Pottinger 2.0, targeting Surve and the Segunjalo Group. What now do you see as a role of social media? I mean, given the fact that anyone could just wake up one morning deciding that they are going to go after you for some reason, we do not know whether it's paid or not. And they say all sorts of things. And banks are everywhere. They've got eyes everywhere. And the next thing you get a notification, alerting you of the fact that they are terminating your relationship with the bank as a result of such. I mean, this is what they have been saying and justifying these illegal closures of bank accounts, targeting certain individuals and companies. What are your thoughts around that issue?
I think you raise a very important point, because if you take SANEF, for example, I mean, this came out with a statement recently, but if you look at who funds SANEF, it's BASA, it's ABSA, it's FNB, it's all of these banks, right? So along with others. So look, I think you're right, about 2 years ago, we noticed on social media that there were bots, there were paid users, and we commissioned a study, and we were able to track and show that there were a few people and organizations that were coordinating the attacks against myself. So what's quite funny, if I tweet something within like literally seconds of my tweeting something, bots would come onto my Twitter account and they would, say all negative things and whatever else, etc. And then within an hour, there would be people that are not real people. I mean, some of them are real people, but these are paid. And then we had a young student who was at UNISA who came to confess that they were being paid, to write negative things on social media about me. We then discovered that there was the Daily Maverick who was paying someone on social media to write negative things, and had a group of people writing negative things about myself and Sekunjalo. So what's happened on social media is that you've got these people that have got a lot of money, right? Enormous amounts of money. And they've set up these units all over the country targeting progressive people and people like myself. And I know this because we were able to expose them. We were able to use analytics to expose them. I'll give you another example. Recently, there was a center called the Center for Analytical Behavioral Change or something. Very nice name, by the way. And they attached to their name UCT. And this center, the Graduate School of Business at UCT, this center was the center that published the instigators of the July, unrest. Now, all of us know there were no instigators of the July unrest. The people are poor. People are rising up because of unemployment and poverty. And this is, and of course, because former President Zuma was jailed, and that was part of the issue. However, this so-called expert unit went out and identified certain people out there. I don't know all of them, but I saw there were about 12 of them, without any evidence to suggest that they were behind the unrest. The president then goes and takes their findings and goes and says they were instigators. He has now retracted that. But what I found fascinating was that after this grouping was exposed, and they funded by Gates and various others, and when UCT was confronted by our journalist about this, UCT said, no, we have nothing to do with this unit. And this unit was then, served legal papers. And subsequently that, there was one of the women that was involved, Piti, was in fact released and was found not guilty, and the judge or magistrate threw out the case. So here is a very clear example, right, where there are these organized, well-paid, well-funded, well-choreographed units out there, established precisely with the aim of discrediting alternative voices, independent voices, liberating voices. So I am not surprised, and I laugh about it. In fact, I think once I tweeted about it, is that the moment I tweet something, in literally the next few minutes, I'm inundated with bots and paid users on my Twitter timeline. But of course, there's lots of people as well that would come out there and support it. Now, I'm not saying that. So social media is a great platform, but we have to protect ourselves on social media. But there's one more important thing I want to point out. You see, large media companies like ours, for example, but in particular, the Afrikaner apartheid media companies, Naspers and Media 24, because that's what they are. They're still controlled by Naspers. They come out of apartheid. They have billions and billions of rands. So what they do, through their media articles, they dominate social media space, because ultimately the media articles that appear on social media are those that come from news sites. And we mustn't ever forget that. But it's important for us to have this discussion, and in particular, the question must be, how do we democratize social media? How do we retain our independence of social media? And how do we protect progressive forces that are not part of the establishment? How do we protect those voices? I mean, I think, Surve, in your case, for example, the Insight Factor, you guys are doing a fantastic job. And you've really shaken up social media. But I can assure you, you're going to be targeted by the likes of the Daily Mavericks. You're going to be targeted by the likes of News 24, and you're going to be targeted by organized units, well-funded, to discredit you personally and, of course, Inside Factor itself. And we have to find ways and means, and we have to come together. We have to come together outside of these political parties. We have to come together as Democrats. We have to come together and find a way to reclaim our right to have our voice in our own country.
Thank you, Dr. Surve. I would like to go into this quickly. The issue of banks, a lot of banks that you are clients of, have dealings in many sectors, whether it's energy, whether it's mining and other sectors, and IT sectors that you do business in. Have you found that there could be, you mentioned that there were some people who were doing things to lower the share price of some of your companies and such and such. Has it happened to you that perhaps you were approached by certain people asking you, to offload, get some of these things off your plate, and perhaps maybe walk away from a certain sector?
Yes, thank you. In fact, we say so in our court papers. We are very specific, by the way. We have an example where Nedbank in particular, and I'll tell you the very real example. This has happened to all of our businesses. So Nedbank sent us a letter very specifically to say that you had better sell your business to this third party. And if you don't sell the business to this third party, we will shut your bank accounts, right? And this has been the case with ABSA. There was a grouping linked to ABSA at the time, etc. So what is happening here? There's an attempt by the banks shutting our accounts, making it impossible for us to operate, to then come and steal the businesses, either liquidate them, take them for nothing, or get them sold to the friends. Because at the end of the day, the establishment capital wants to control all of these businesses. And I think what they've been surprised by is our resistance, the fact that we've fought them, the fact that we've taken them to the courts. Now, I know a lot of people don't have a lot of faith in the courts, but I continue to have faith in the courts. I continue to believe that it's important to exhaust all avenues. And I'm confident that, ultimately karma is on our side. At the end of the day, if you've done good in life, it'll be good for you and for our people. We have 8,500 employees. We have 40,000 dependents in our group. These people are evil. They don't care about them. Sometimes I do think maybe I should be less outspoken. Maybe I should step back. Maybe if I do that, I could just save the jobs of all the people. But then I go to our employees and I listen to them and I say, Doc, we stand by you. We stand for the values. We believe in what you're doing. Please continue to fight. We will fight. What these banks are doing is unfair. I mean, why target us? What have we done? We've done nothing wrong. Nobody has ever come and said what we've done wrong. Show us one thing we've done wrong. In 20 odd years of business, not one. Not a single employee of ours. Nobody. We have operated with absolute integrity. Yet they spin these stories. And by the way, when we send them a summons for defamation, they then say, you know what, you're trying to prevent the media from reporting a news. I mean, recently this mad guy called Chris Roper, a complete idiot who writes for the Financial Mail, says, Second should not defend itself. Dr. Surve should not actually send a summons for defamation against other media houses because he's just trying to stop us from talking about him. But when you lie, I'll give you an example, right? A real example. I go to the Party Commission and I say to the Party Commission, I bought independent media because in the white media, black people are shown as barbarians, as people that are not professionals, as people that are not artists, that are not writers, etc. I wanted independent media to show that black people are people like anyone else in the world, that are professionals, soccer players, sports people, artists, business people, you name it, right? The next day, Warren Thompson writes a headline in Business Day newspaper, and he says, Survey attacks white people and calls them barbarians. Now, if you want to understand, well, I think he said, not call them, but he said, Surve attacks white people. That's what he said, right? And if you want to understand how they distort everything which I say, right? Have you ever asked why nothing about Second Jalo or whatever I say ever appears in Business Day, Sunday Times, News 24, Daily Maverick? Have you ever asked why? Because they don't want to publish the truth. They don't want to publish our side of the story. And so they distort repeatedly absolutely everything. They put it in headlines. I can give you an example. They will write about articles about things that I have no idea about. They'll use my photograph. They'll use my face. They'll doctor my face. They will make it look like terrible. I don't look like what the Daily Maverick makes me look like, by the way, just out of interest. They will use my name, and I have nothing to do with any of this stuff. But the idea is, you see, if you repeat a lie often enough, you'll get people to believe you, right? And this is the old Nazi philosophy. Look, these people are Nazis, man. The origin of apartheid, of Afrikanerdom, is from Nazism. Stellenbosch University was the African epicenter of Nazism. Forster was from the Ossifa Brandbach. So what has changed? Nothing has changed. The only thing that has changed is under Ramaphosa's leadership, they've become emboldened to become Nazis again. That's all. So that's all that's happening. And someone like myself that, it was very interesting. I met a former security policeman that was hunting me down during the apartheid days. And he came to see me because of something completely different about two months ago. And he said to me, Doctor, of course he speaks Afrikaans. He said to me, Doctor, we couldn't get you during apartheid, but now we're going to get you. So the same apartheid security forces who were trying to hunt me down during apartheid are active today. Ask Sam Sol, Amapungani. Ask him who he really is. So many journalists have accused him of being a spy for military intelligence and apartheid intelligence. He has never come out once to deny it. Right? Ask who Amapungani really is and where they come from. Well, why don't you ask Branislav Brick, the Serbian from Daily Maverick, where he gets his money from? Do you know they claim to be transparent at Daily Maverick? We know, of course, where they get the money from. I know where they get the money from. If you can find out where Daily Maverick gets its money from, you will know what Daily Maverick stands for. We know News 24 is an apartheid media house. We know all of that. We know the Ruperts funded the purchase of Arena through ABSA. So what's the point here, right? The point is that these people that operated during apartheid have just simply resurfaced. They were sleepers for the last while. And the current administration has just allowed them to actually become... you can have organizations out there that have suddenly emerged that were there during apartheid. But you know what? This is just a little small dent in our struggle for freedom. We will survive. We will triumph. All of us, by the way. And I have great confidence in young people. Young people, the future are our future. And if I'm an inspiration, as you have kindly said, it's only because I want young people to believe that they can overcome this phase of apartheid as we did, when we struggled before 94. So I just want to say that, from my side, I'm really thankful for this opportunity, and I'm very thankful to be given the opportunity to be able to, because the other media doesn't do that, you see. They don't give me this opportunity because they're scared. That's why. Because I tell the truth and I've got nothing to fear. I was poor when I grew up. I was extremely poor. I lived with a very large family of 13, 14 people in a 2-bedroom house. And we all got educated. And I understood then how you overcome adversity with nothing, right? I don't mind having nothing, by the way. You asked me at the beginning, you said you're putting at risk everything. It is true. I don't mind having nothing. I was poor, and I'm still poor today. I can be very happy to be poor today. But I will die a rich man fighting for my values. Money does not make you rich. What makes you rich is if you believe and you fight for what you believe, and you have values, and you don't allow bullies and Nazis to emerge and take your freedom from you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Surve.
We have to wrap up now because I
Oh,
really need
yeah,
to eat and I really need to rest.
of course. Yeah,
I can
just
always
one
come
last
back again. Always come
question.
back again.
Sure. Just one last question. Um, I want to hear from you about the political will in our country because the things that you're describing, Dr. Surve, are very bizarre. It's so surreal listening to you describe the landscape that we all live in. You know, many of us just walk around oblivious about what's going on. So all these reminders are just to a point shocking. And to some of us, they might even be discouraging. Is there any political will, particularly from the so-called liberation movement, but and other formations in the country, to make a change from what you have observed? Just in closing.
Look, I can't speak for political movements. I can only speak for myself and people that I work with. But there are very many good people in political movements. We must not paint everybody with the same brush. Um, you know, as I always say, they are good. It's not so much they're good and bad people. They're good deeds and bad deeds. But what we must understand is that the establishment, the neo-Nazis of apartheid, who've re-emerged today as powerful capitalists and their proxies, have succeeded in dividing our people by putting crumbs on the floor and getting them all to fight for those crumbs. What we need again is to present the vision for our people, get our people united, no matter where they are, which political party, which entity, no matter how old or young they are, get them united to have genuine freedom. The first thing that we need to do is create jobs for our people. We cannot have a situation where there's 35% unemployment and 70% unemployment amongst, in particular, African youth in this country. That is unacceptable. There's no future for our graduates. There's no future. You know, it's hollow to talk about a trillion rand investment in this economy when it doesn't benefit our people. Now, we have to mobilize our people. Look, I'm a firm believer in democracy. I'm a firm believer in people's power. And we must ignore the politicians and political organizations. There are some very many good political organizations, lots of good people within those. But at the end of the day, we must not allow ourselves to be divided and distracted, because that's what those who want to retain the ill-gotten wealth of apartheid want us to do. They want us to fight amongst ourselves. They want us to destroy ourselves so that they can hold on to their ill-gotten wealth and become even more richer at the expense of our people. So let's let's bring a movement together of all young people in particular in this country that's going to bring the best and the brightest of our people together to reclaim our country and its future. And that is possible. What I want to say to you, in Chile, for instance, just recently, a 34-year-old became president of Chile against all odds because he stood for the rights of Chileans, and he was able to become, his party was able to become the largest party in Chile, beating the existing right-wing and left-wing parties, right, in Chile. Now that is an inspiration to all of us in South Africa, that even Chile it's possible for a 34-year-old leftist Marxist to become president of that country. So I have great hope that amongst the listeners here today, we're going to find that kind of Chilean president that's going to become president of our country and that's going to guide us. And young people we must come together, and we must not be distracted. You know, we must live our lives but not be distracted. We must not become extravagant. We must learn to be disciplined. We must learn to fight for our country and its rights. And it's a new fight. It's a new beginning. During apartheid, those of us that are old like myself, you know, we fought. But young people today have a different battle altogether, because then we could see the enemy. It was in front of us. The enemy was in government. It was white racism in an extrovert way. Today you don't see the enemy very clearly. The enemy is also amongst us.
It has been a very sobering evening with you, Doc, in conversation with us on various issues that you've covered here. I need to let you go. I know that you are fasting and it's time for you to actually rejoin your family and get back to your life and maybe try to get some vitamins so we can continue sometime next week. Um, Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us here tonight. We hope to have you very soon back here on the Insight Factor.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much. All the best to everyone.
Thank you. Right. So from me, Tabo Makwakwa, Sizwe Low, and of course my co-host Motivo Motive was not here tonight, but of course joining all the listeners who are here listening to the beautiful doctor. Thank you so much for joining us. Till we meet again, a very good night. Goodbye.